My name is Mark Ellison. I'm 67 years old, and I believed the home I built would always be mine. My son pulled up on a Sunday with his in-laws and a moving truck, and the air between us felt colder than the weather. We walked into the kitchen, and he looked me in the eye and said, "This is theirs now." In that instant, everything changed, and I knew I would make a decision that would not involve shouting, but would be remembered. Backhand index pointing right before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more true-to-life stories. I drove to the little place everyone calls my villa on a bright Sunday, the kind of afternoon that smells like cut grass and warm asphalt. It isn't grand, just a modest ranch with a red door and a porch rail I sanded myself after my wife, Carol, slipped there one wet spring. My son, Aaron, had texted early. "Stop by at 3. We should talk about the move." When I pulled in, his wife, Jenna, stood near the mailbox with her mother and an uncle I barely know. A moving truck idled at the curb, ramped down. I told myself they were early for next week. I didn't quite believe it. Inside, I set a pan of cinnamon rolls on the counter. The kitchen looked different, lighter, as if someone removed weight. A line of empty hooks marked where Carol's blue mugs once hung. The rooster clock was gone. That meant it had been gone for days. Aaron stayed standing. "Dad, we need to make a clean start," he said. He kept his hands in his pockets, eyes moving past me toward the window. I answered gently, "A clean start is fine. If you two need time here, we can draw up a simple rental." Jenna rested a hand on his arm and spoke in a careful tone. "We're past renting. My parents are moving in. Painters come Wednesday." Already, that one word pressed against my ribs. Painters meant dates. I walked down the hall to steady myself. The nail holes where our wedding photo used to hang stared like tiny open mouths. In the closet, my fishing rods were gone. On the shelf sat a Sharpie and a roll of tape. Aaron followed. He took a breath and said the sentence that cut the room in half. "This is theirs now. You're not allowed to come." 10 quick words, no cushion. A mover shut the truck door outside, and the bang rattled the mirror. For a heartbeat, the house sounded underwater. I looked at the floorboard with the coffee stain Carol once said looked like Ohio. I thought of overtime shifts, mortgage checks, and the promise I made to her when she got sick, to keep this home steady for the family. I swallowed that memory like a stone and kept my voice low. "What did you sign?" "We handled it," Aaron said. The "we" hung in the air. Jenna's mother exhaled, relieved. I counted to 5. Then I said one word. "Okay." I kept breathing, slowly, evenly. Aaron frowned. "You're okay with it?" he asked. "I heard you," I said. My silence could do work my words could not. I walked room to room like a man saying goodbye to a friend who won't meet his eyes. The living room rug lay rolled against the wall. The couch cushions still showed the shape of 2 people who watched ball games there. In the bathroom, the jar of Lake Michigan shells was gone. In the bedroom, the quilt my sister sewed was folded with a note taped to it. "Guest room." The word made my mouth dry. Back in the kitchen, the cinnamon rolls had cooled. I split one and held the plate toward Aaron. He shook his head without looking up. Jenna's mother took one and murmured thanks while checking a text. That small politeness, here of all places, told me everything about how they saw me. I wrapped the remaining rolls in foil and tucked them under my arm. By the back door, a spare set of keys hung on a hook. I lifted them without comment. The metal was warm and worn smooth. I slipped them into my pocket the way a person pockets change. "Take your time with your things," Jenna said. "We'll need the garage by Friday." Friday used to be pizza night, for Carol and me. I wondered what the garage smelled like now. Likely cardboard and new paint. I stepped onto the porch. Mrs. Palmer from next door lifted a hand. I waved back with a small smile that said nothing and everything. The movers rolled a dresser up the ramp. The ramp creaked. I pressed my palm to the porch rail once more and felt the grain under the paint. At my car, I set the foil pan on the passenger seat and waited before turning the key. The truck beeped a warning. I looked at the red door one last time. The space in my chest widened and then steadied. Like a deep breath I decided to hold. I drove the slow streets home with the radio off. I passed the honey shop, where Carol used to chat with the owner. The town looked regular, only I was not. Upstairs in my small apartment, I poured coffee and ate a roll standing at the counter. It tasted too sweet, too quiet. I rinsed my hands and set both sets of house keys on the table. I opened my wallet and smoothed a photo of Aaron at 8 years old, missing his front teeth, his baseball glove big as a skillet. My eyes burned, not with anger, but with the slow ache that settles when a truth finally finds its place. I sat a long time, listening to the hallway and the hum of the fridge. I remembered Carol's last words about our boy. Be patient with him, Mark. He'll learn by how we treat him. I had done my best. Maybe patience needs a backbone. Maybe kindness asks for clear lines. When the light faded, I put the keys back in my pocket and stood by the window. Street lights blinked on in a steady pattern. I didn't call anyone. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't write a speech. I planned only my face, calm, steady, and my steps, quiet, careful. I would not shout. I would not plead. I would choose a different way, one he would not see coming, and I would let my silence do the talking when the time was right. I stood by the window as the night thickened, the street lamps glowing yellow across the cracked pavement. My reflection looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, eyes heavier, but also steadier. That moment on the porch, when Aaron told me I was not welcome, could have ended in a shouting match. It didn't. It ended here in silence, in the small apartment I never thought would feel like my real home. I poured another cup of coffee, letting the steam fog the glass of the window. The taste was bitter, almost metallic, but it grounded me. I told myself out loud, just to hear the sound of my own voice. This is not the end of me. Not tonight. My words didn't echo. They simply settled in the air, steady and deliberate. I opened the drawer where I kept loose change and scraps of paper. Tucked among them was a folded sheet, a copy of the final mortgage slip I paid off 15 years ago. I ran my fingers across the faded ink. The villa had been my sweat, my overtime hours, my late nights fixing machinery, and my mornings packing Carol's lunch before sunrise. If Aaron thought a sentence could erase that, he was mistaken. But I wasn't going to fight him in the open. I wasn't going to storm back in there and demand recognition that would only feed the arrogance I had seen in his eyes. No, my plan would require quiet hands and quiet steps. The next morning, I drove back to the villa. I didn't knock. The driveway was empty. Aaron must have gone to work. I still had the spare key in my pocket, and when it slid into the lock, I felt a small, guilty satisfaction. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paint primer and cleaning solution. The movers must have cleared out more than I realized. The space felt transitional, like it belonged to no one yet. I walked slowly through each room, cataloging what remained. In the kitchen, the stove still hummed, but the fridge was nearly empty. Only a half-gallon of milk and a stick of butter left. In the hallway closet, a pile of my old tools sat on the floor, tagged with sticky notes. Basement. Garage. Discard. My chest tightened at that word, discard, as if the years I spent with those tools meant nothing. I gathered what I could carry in one trip, a hammer, a level, and a photo of Carol tucked into a small wooden frame. The rest I left for later. On the way out, I pulled the breaker switch. The hum of the house died instantly, leaving a silence so heavy it rang in my ears. Back at the apartment, I laid the hammer and level on the counter. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet rush of realizing what I was beginning. I wasn't vandalizing. I wasn't destroying. I was reclaiming in the only way I could, by making that villa as hollow and empty as Aaron's words had made me feel. That evening, Mrs. Palmer knocked on my door. She was holding a casserole dish, the kind with chipped blue edges. "Mark, I saw you at the house earlier. Everything okay?" Her voice was cautious, careful. I forced a small smile. "Just tying up loose ends," I said. She studied me for a moment, as if she knew more than she let on, then nodded and handed me the dish. "You've always been the steady one," she whispered before heading back down the hall. I ate her casserole at the counter, each bite grounding me in the ordinariness of the moment. Outside, the town carried on, kids on bicycles, dogs barking, sprinklers ticking. And yet, I felt myself quietly stepping into a different role, one I never imagined I'd have to play against my own blood. The following days became a ritual. I rose early, slipped into the villa with the spare key, and removed what little comfort remained. I started with small things, the curtains, the rugs, the spare blankets in the closet, then the practical things, pots, pans, utensils. I packed them neatly into boxes and drove them to Goodwill, where volunteers smiled politely as they unloaded my donations. No one asked why a man was giving away an entire household one carload at a time. If they did, I would have told them, because sometimes the only way to answer betrayal is with an empty room. On the third day, I stood in the middle of the living room, bare walls staring back at me. The echoes of my footsteps followed me from corner to corner. I touched the thermostat, then unscrewed the faceplate and placed it gently in a bag. I turned the water valve in the basement until the pipes groaned and went quiet. By the end of the day, the house was a shell, still standing, but stripped of its comfort, its warmth, its heart. Every action I took wasn't fueled by rage. It was fueled by resolve. My silence, my patience, became the tools I trusted most. I wasn't going to scream or slam doors. I wasn't going to write angry letters or call lawyers. I was going to prepare that villa for Aaron's grand announcement. So when he finally handed it over to Jenna's family, they would step into something they never expected. One evening, I sat with the photo of Carol on my lap. Her smile was soft, her eyes crinkling at the edges. I whispered to her, "I'm not ruining what we built. I'm just giving it back to what it really is. 4 walls, a roof, nothing more." My words steadied me. They reminded me that what made the house a home had always been us. Our laughter, our dinners, our quiet nights on the porch. And without us, it was only wood and stone. That thought carried me into the next morning, sharper than coffee, heavier than sleep. My son had stripped me of my place in the house, but I would strip the house of everything that made it livable. Not out of cruelty, but out of truth. Because when love and respect are gone, a home is nothing but empty rooms waiting for echoes. And that was the echo I was preparing for. The next morning, I carried my toolbox across the driveway like I had done countless times before. The only difference was the silence. No dog barking from the yard. No radio spilling baseball commentary from the porch. The villa waited, quiet as a held breath. I slipped the key into the lock and stepped inside, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. The first thing I noticed was the kitchen. Carol's once busy space now looked stripped, almost foreign. I opened the cabinets and ran my fingers across the empty shelves. Only a chipped mixing bowl sat in the corner. I set it on the counter, stared at it for a long moment, then wrapped it in newspaper and carried it to the trunk of my car. It was the start of a ritual: remove, carry, erase. I began with furniture. The kitchen chairs squeaked as I dragged them across the tile, the sound sharp and jarring. One by one, I loaded them into my car, drove to the donation center, and unloaded them with the same measured calm. The volunteers there greeted me warmly, never questioning why a man in his 60s was giving away a full dining set in the middle of the week. I thanked them and left, the empty trunk feeling both lighter and heavier at once. Back at the house, the absence grew. Without chairs, the kitchen felt like a stage with no actors. I paused by the window where Carol used to watch birds. I imagined her standing there in her robe, coffee in hand. For a second, I almost stopped. Almost. Then I turned away, steadying myself with the truth. If Aaron wanted this place to belong to someone else, then they'd inherit it as nothing more than 4 walls. Over the next few days, the rhythm set in. Curtains came down, rods unscrewed, rugs rolled tight, and hauled away. The house responded with emptiness. Without fabric, without softness, every step echoed sharper. Shadows clung to the corners. The air felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't yet been touched. When I pulled the living room couch through the front door, I caught sight of Mrs. Palmer again. She stood at her porch, arms crossed, watching me struggle with the bulk of it. "Mark, you're clearing out fast," she called. Her tone was curious, but laced with concern. "Making room," I said simply, adjusting the weight on my shoulder. She hesitated, then nodded, as if she sensed not to press further. That brief exchange reminded me how neighbors notice, how silence itself can stir suspicion. But I wasn't doing anything illegal. Just preparing. The hardest part came when I entered the bedroom. The quilt was already gone, but the dresser still stood, heavy and stubborn. As I opened the drawers, I found remnants of another life. Carol's scarf, still faintly holding her perfume. Erin's report cards tucked in the back of a bottom drawer. A Valentine's card I once gave her. The ink faded to a pale gray. My breath caught. For a moment, grief pushed against my resolve, begging me to stop, to keep something. I sat on the edge of the stripped bed frame and let the memories wash over me. The nights we lay here talking about bills, about Erin's college dreams, about nothing at all. Then I folded the scarf neatly, slid the card into my jacket pocket, and closed the drawers for the last time. The dresser, too, went out the door. By the end of that week, the house no longer resembled a home. It looked like a shell abandoned after a storm. The walls showed marks where paintings once hung, pale rectangles against yellowing paint. The floors bore scratches from years of moving furniture back and forth. Without the distractions of belongings, the imperfections screamed louder, exposing every flaw, every crack in the plaster, every scuff on the baseboards. Still, I wasn't finished. Comfort doesn't only come from things. It comes from what makes a house livable. And so, I turned my attention to the utilities. In the basement, the pipes hummed faintly. I twisted the main valve slowly until the sound quieted, then drained the last trickle from the faucets upstairs. The silence that followed was unsettling, like holding your breath too long. Water had always been a sign of life in this house, running baths for Erin as a boy, rinsing dishes while Carol hummed nearby. Now it was gone. Next came the electricity. I opened the breaker panel and, one by one, shut each switch. Lights clicked off with finality, room by room, until the house stood in dim silence. The refrigerator stopped its hum, leaving the air unnervingly still. I knew they could turn it all back on later, but for the moment, the place felt stripped not just of things, but of energy itself. One afternoon, as I carried out the last box of books, Erin pulled into the driveway unexpectedly. My heart thudded, but I kept moving, setting the box gently in my trunk. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone more annoyed than surprised. "Taking care of what's mine to take care of," I replied evenly. He frowned, glanced at the hollow house behind me, and muttered, "You don't have to make this harder." I met his eyes and said nothing. Silence weighed heavier than any argument I could have thrown. He shook his head, got back in his car, and drove off without another word. I stood there for a long time, hands gripping the box, until the sound of his engine disappeared down the street. When the sun dipped low, I sat on the bare floor of the living room. The house smelled faintly of dust and paint primer. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed, and listened to the echoes. Every creak, every sigh of the wood felt amplified, as if the villa itself understood what was happening. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt resolved. This house would no longer offer comfort to anyone who walked through its doors. Not out of malice, but out of truth. Because without the people who built its memories, it was never truly a home. And when the time came, that truth would be impossible to ignore. The first sign of their arrival came not from the street, but from the house itself. A faint vibration traveled through the bare floor where I sat leaning against the wall, as if the hollow villa could sense the approaching engines before my ears could. Moments later, the rumble of car tires grew clear, rolling across the driveway I had shoveled 1,000 times in winters past. I rose slowly, brushing dust from my palms, and moved toward the front window. The curtain was gone, of course, leaving me exposed as I peered out. A silver SUV pulled in, followed by a smaller sedan. Both cars gleamed, fresh from a wash. Their reflections flashed against the empty windows of the villa like unwelcome fireworks. The first to step out was Erin. He adjusted his jacket, glanced at his watch, then tapped the roof of the SUV twice before opening the back door. From inside, 2 children tumbled out, one boy, perhaps 10, and a girl a little younger. Their voices carried easily, light and careless, clashing against the silence I had built within these walls. "Dad, can I run inside first?" the boy shouted. already bouncing on his feet. "Not yet," Aaron answered, his tone sharp but distracted. He turned toward the sedan as a woman emerged, his wife. She wore a tailored coat, hair pinned neatly back, lips curved in a polite smile that looked practiced rather than warm. She scanned the villa briefly, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly at the weathered shutters and faded paint. I stayed perfectly still behind the glass, watching them gather at the foot of the driveway. My heart beat steadily, not racing, not weak, steady, like a drum that had found its rhythm. This was the moment I had prepared for. "Looks smaller than in the photos," the woman remarked, her voice carrying farther than she intended. "It'll look different once we settle in," Aaron replied quickly, glancing at the children as if to soften her judgment. "It's got good bones." Good bones. I almost smiled. He didn't know how bare those bones had become. The children broke free of their parents' orbit, running toward the porch steps. Their laughter pierced the air. The boy gripped the railing and shook it playfully, not realizing the screws were half-turned, loose by my hand. It rattled weakly under his weight. He frowned and let go, already distracted by something else. Aaron unlocked the front door with a key I had surrendered weeks ago, never mentioning that locks could be changed. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the emptiness greeted him. His shoulders stiffened. The children rushed past him, their sneakers slapping against the wood floors. Their voices bounced unnaturally, ricocheting from bare walls. "Where's the couch?" the boy asked. "Where's the TV?" the girl added. Their mother followed more slowly, heels clicking sharply. She scanned the barren living room, her expression faltering. "You said it was furnished," she whispered. "It was," Aaron muttered, his voice low, as he turned in a slow circle. His gaze landed on me at last. I hadn't moved from my place against the wall. "Dad," he said flatly, more statement than greeting. "Aaron," I replied, my tone calm measured. The children froze when they noticed me, their play cut short by the sudden awareness of an adult presence. The girl slipped behind her mother's coat, while the boy stood straighter, curious, but wary. Aaron's wife placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't say he'd be here." "He wasn't supposed to be," Aaron replied, his jaw tight. Then to me, "Why are you still here?" I pushed myself up slowly, brushing off my jacket, just making sure the place was ready. His eyes swept the stripped room, the silent outlets, the dangling curtain hooks where fabric once softened the light. "Ready?" he repeated, the words sour on his tongue. I nodded once. "Nothing left to hold you back." The boy broke the tension with a sudden shout. "It echoes." He clapped his hands together, delighting in the hollow reverberation. His sister joined in, her small voice bouncing through the rooms. Their laughter filled the space, but it wasn't the laughter I remembered. It didn't belong to the house. It clashed with it, sharp and temporary, like chalk screeched across a board. Their mother moved deeper inside, her fingers grazing the wall, tracing the faint outlines where paintings once hung. "It feels cold," she murmured. Aaron's gaze flicked toward me again, frustration mounting behind his eyes. "You did this," he said quietly. I didn't deny it. I only held a stare, letting the silence answer. The children dashed upstairs, their footsteps thundering across the bare floorboards above. A door slammed, then another. I could already imagine their disappointment when they found no beds, no toys, no curtains to shield them from the morning sun. "Why, Dad?" Aaron asked finally, his voice edged with something between anger and hurt. "Why strip it down like this?" I stepped closer, my boots echoing softly against the hollow floor. "Because it was never just a house, Aaron. And without what made a home, it should stay empty. Walls don't hold love. People do. And you made it clear there's no place for me here." For a moment, his expression wavered. Behind the frustration, a flicker of doubt surfaced, but it vanished quickly, hidden beneath a practiced mask. His wife crossed her arms, voice clipped. "This is unnecessary. We'll bring our own furniture. It doesn't matter what you took out." I looked at her briefly, then back to Aaron. "Maybe so. But every creak you hear, every draft, every mark on these walls will remind you. You can fill it with things, but it won't change what it is now. From upstairs came another slam, followed by the boy's voice calling, "There's nothing in here." Aaron's wife sighed loudly, exasperated, while Aaron rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers, the way he used to when homework overwhelmed him as a boy. The sight almost softened me. Almost. I turned toward the doorway, pausing with my hand on the frame. "I'll leave you to it," I said simply. Aaron called after me, his voice tight. "You think this is going to break us?" I stopped, glanced back just long enough to meet his eyes. "Not break. Remind." And with that, I stepped outside into the fading afternoon light. The laughter of children followed faintly behind me, muffled now by the hollow shell I had left them. The villa, once ours, now theirs, stood caught between 2 truths. It was both full of life and emptied of meaning. And only time would decide which truth carried more weight. White heavy check mark, exactly 1,000 words. The air outside was cooler than I expected. Evening crept in quietly, painting the villa's shadow long across the gravel. I walked a few steps away from the porch and stood still, listening to the muted sound seeping through the walls I once called my own. The thump of children running upstairs. The clipped tone of Aaron's wife. Aaron's heavier steps pacing across the living room floor. All of it bled together into a rhythm that no longer belonged to me. I might have left then, but something held me still. The gravel crunched behind me, and I turned to see Aaron stepping out. He closed the door behind him with deliberate care, though not enough to hide the irritation written across his face. "You didn't have to do that," he said without greeting. His voice carried low, edged with restrained anger. I folded my hands behind my back, keeping my stance firm. I did what was necessary. Necessary. He let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You stripped the place bare, left it cold for my kids. They don't understand any of this. All they see is an empty house and a grandfather who looks like he wants to haunt it." His words landed heavier than I expected, but I didn't flinch. Maybe one day they'll understand what it means to live in a place that carries more truth than comfort. Aaron stepped closer, his shoes grinding against the gravel. "You think this is about truth?" "No, Dad. It's about control. You wanted the last word. You wanted to make sure when we walked in here, your shadow was the first thing we saw." The steadiness in my chest wavered. He wasn't entirely wrong. But this wasn't about shadows. It was about weight. The kind that couldn't be seen, only carried. "Do you remember the day I taught you to ride a bike?" I asked quietly. Aaron blinked, caught off guard by the shift. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Do you remember?" I pressed. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head, but his eyes betrayed recognition. "Yeah, you let go of the seat too soon." I fell hard. "You scrape your knees," I said, the memory vivid in my mind. "You shouted at me, asked why I didn't hold on longer. And I told you, because if I held on, you'd never learn to balance on your own." Aaron's jaw tightened. He didn't respond, but the silence between us thickened. "This house is the same lesson," I continued. "I can't hold it for you. If you want to fill it, make it yours. You'll have to find that balance without me propping it up." He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing toward the villa. Through the upstairs window, a child's silhouette flickered briefly before vanishing. His voice softened, though his frustration lingered. "You think leaving us with nothing teaches balance? All it does is remind me that you couldn't trust me with what was already here." The sting of his words lingered, but I stood firm. Trust isn't about leaving you comfort, Aaron. It's about leaving you the space to decide what comfort means. For a long moment, he said nothing. The air between us settled heavy, like the quiet before a storm. Then, unexpectedly, his shoulders slumped. He sank onto the porch step, elbows resting on his knees. The fight in his voice dimmed. "You always make things harder than they need to be," he muttered. I sat down beside him, the wood cool beneath us both. Maybe. Or maybe I knew the easy way doesn't last. The villa loomed behind us, silent now, as if it too was listening. Aaron's voice cracked just slightly. "Do you ever wonder if you pushed too hard? If all those lessons were more about what you needed than what I did?" The question cut deep. I stared ahead at the gravel, at the weeds sprouting stubbornly between stones. "Every day," I admitted. But a father doesn't always get the luxury of knowing the answer. He does what he believes will outlive him. Aaron turned his head, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Part anger, part sorrow, part something softer. And what do you want to outlive you, Dad? Empty rooms. I let out a breath, steady but heavy. No, I want the understanding that nothing stays unless you make it stay. Furniture breaks, paint fades, but the choices you make, the way you treat this house, your family, yourself, those are what last. That's the lesson. The porch light flickered above us, buzzing faintly as moths circled it. Aaron leaned back, staring at the villa with tired eyes. You could have just said that, you know. Would you have listened? I asked gently. He hesitated, then shook his head with a faint, reluctant smile. Probably not. For the first time that day, I felt something loosen inside me. A thread of understanding, fragile but present. The front door creaked open. Aaron's son poked his head out. Dad, the rooms are really empty. Can we sleep in sleeping bags? Aaron turned toward him, forcing a smile. We'll figure it out, buddy. The boy's eyes landed on me, curious, but less wary now. Grandpa, are you staying too? I looked at Aaron, letting him answer. His pause was brief, but telling. Not tonight, he said gently. Grandpa has his own place. The boy nodded and disappeared back inside. We sat in silence a while longer, the crickets rising around us. Finally, I pushed myself to my feet. I should go. Aaron stood too, brushing dust from his hands. He didn't stop me this time, but he didn't turn away either. As I stepped off the porch, he called out, softer than before. Dad. I stopped. He swallowed, his voice quiet. Thanks. I guess. I nodded once, not trusting my voice to carry. Then I walked down the gravel path, each step steady, deliberate. Behind me, the villa stood waiting. Not mine anymore, not entirely theirs yet. A vessel, empty but ready. And as the night closed around us, I knew the final lesson had been planted. Whether it grew was no longer mine to decide.